Hey, welcome back to Magic Ball Grid. My name is Andre. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is Blood and Water, the fourth data pack from the Red Sand cycle. We just did the runner side, and so we're going to jump into the corp side of things. We got 13 cards on the corp side, which is a lot. So I'm going to try and make an effort to go a bit faster, at least on certain cards, the ones I don't have much to say about. Otherwise, there are timestamps in the description below if you want to jump around to a specific card. And otherwise, I guess let's just begin. Seems like, yeah, let's just begin. This is Whampoa Reclamation, and while it's not the first corp card, it's actually the one I wanted to start with. To be completely honest, I was actually highly considering making a separate video just to talk about Whampoa Reclamation. It's something I've done before, to talk about specific cards. I decided ultimately not to, but regardless, I think I want to open with this card just because I think there's a lot to say about it. So yeah, this is Whampoa Reclamation. It's 3 to res. 3 to trash. It's a neutral card and it's an asset. It's also a corporation subtype, which I think is something that's relatively new, if not entirely new. Now, Whampoa Reclamation has an instant ability on it. So yeah, at any point in time, you can trash 1 card from HQ, and if you do so, you can add 1 card from archives to the bottom of R&D. However, you can only use this ability once per turn. Now, despite being a neutral card, this card does cost 2 influence, so anybody who wants it is going to be playing influence for it. So it's a bit harder for every single faction to get, which is interesting. Talk a bit about the flavor. This is Whampoa Reclamation, and Whampoa is a real place that exists on Earth. In fact, there's a bunch of places with the name Whampoa. Whampoa is like the romanticized name of the Chinese Huangpu area, which is in the southeast, I believe. It's kind of a port of some sort. It translates to Yellow Bank. There's actually a whole bunch of things that show up when you search up Whampoa, like the Whampoa Military Academy, or the island Changzhou, or the Huangpu District. Anyways, it's a real Chinese place. And here we are on Mars, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm kind of ignorant when it comes to Asian scripts, but I believe there's some Chinese writing on top of this this beam here, so that's kind of cool in terms of the theme. So what does this card do? This card lets you trash a card and put it on the bottom of R&D, which doesn't sound incredibly spectacular, but I think it might actually just be. This is our boy here, Jackson Howard. And Jackson Howard's a really big deal. Jackson Howard is probably the most played card in Netrunner on the corp side. It's very rare that you don't see 3 of these in just about every deck since it was released. And the reason is because it's not only very, very, very flexible. I think it's also a high skill cap card, but it helps deal with certain issues that are just inherent to Netrunner when playing the corp, and that's the idea of agenda flood. If you're drawing agendas into your HQ and you have no way to score them, they're going to stay in HQ forever. And so not only can you not hold other cards down the line, you're going to have to be discarding things, but if the runner now runs HQ, you're probably going to lose the game. Jackson Howard does that. It helps you throw out agendas and put them back in your deck, which is really good because you can kind of have some control over what's in HQ. Losing to HQ flood or agenda flood is never really fun. Jackson Howard also lets you draw cards, which accelerates the game. It also helps you against mill IDs that want to put your cards in the archives, and it helps you like survive with that. All in all, I probably don't have to say this, but Jackson Howard's a really cool card. Very valuable card too. However, the problem is Jackson Howard is going to be rotating out in the next 2 or 3 months once we hit rotation. The packs that opening moves is one of the packs that will be cycling out. Jackson Howard will no longer be tournament legal. So there's kind of been a search for the next replacement of Jackson Howard, something that has some ability to do some part of what Jackson Howard does, even if it doesn't let you draw for 2 clicks. Any card that lets you take agendas from HQ and put them into your R&D is very, very valuable. And actually, Damon Stone, the former designer of Netrunner, has stated, I believe, that he's not a big fan of Jackson Howard and was not interested in reprinting Jackson Howard when the new cycles come out, like just have a direct, straight reprint. So I'm not going to hold my breath for that. I don't know whether Jackson Howard's going to be straight reprinted. We have had neutral options to kind of do something like this. This is Pre-Emptive Action, which came out a while ago, and this lets you shuffle cards from archives into R&D. However, because it is a terminal operation, it's actually kind of difficult to get the agendas into archives and then shuffle them with Pre-Emptive Action. So Pre-Emptive Action a lot of time has been used to cycle generally operations or like traps and stuff like that, and hasn't really been useful for cycling agendas. It just doesn't work that well. Whampoa Reclamation actually sort of does that. And I think Whampoa Reclamation is an interesting card for 2 reasons. Not only does it sort of do what Jackson does, but actually I think it's more important for other reasons, because it does things that Jackson doesn't do that are very, very, very strong. So just to talk a bit about his ability, trash 1 card from HQ, add 1 card back, add 1 card from archives to the bottom of R&D. You can add the card that you just trashed from HQ to the bottom of R&D. So you pay the cost, and now that card is in archives, and so now you can put a card onto the bottom of ID. So at least abstractly, or not abstractly, in theory, why did I say that? No, like in practice, you can take an agenda, you can discard it, and put it into archives, and then immediately put that card onto the bottom of R&D. And that basically does something like what Jackson says. What Jackson does, gets rid of agendas, and that's kind of cool. However, you can only use this ability once per turn, which largely means that you can use this ability twice before it's going to be trashed. The idea is that you can res it, use it on your turn, and then on the runner's turn, you can use it again. Because this card is an instant ability, you can actually do it at almost any point in time in the game, that there's a paid ability window. So you don't have to say beginning of turn, okay, I'm going to use this right away. You can wait for the runner to run this, and then right before they access it to trash it, you can use its ability to put a card away. And that's really good because it doesn't force your hand. It's also very good because you can use this while the runner is running HQ. Like right before they access HQ, you can res a Whampoa Reclamation, take an agenda in your hand, and shuffle it away. Or not shuffle it away, put it on the bottom of R&D, which is something that Jackson doesn't exactly do, and that actually makes this card pretty interesting. And now I did say this, I just goofed this a second ago, but that's the biggest thing about this card. This card takes agendas and puts them on the bottom of R&D, or not even agendas, any card, but let's just talk about agendas. This card takes agendas and puts them on the bottom of R&D. Jackson Howard shuffles R&D, and so the agendas could actually be back on the top, but this one puts them on the bottom. And the bottom of R&D is the last place that the runner will ever get to. Unless the corp shuffles their deck, or the runner shuffles the corp's deck. And as long as the corp doesn't shuffle their own deck, which means they're probably not playing Jackson Howard, they just can't play any of the abilities that tutor cards that shuffle their deck. If they're not shuffling their deck, it is very somewhat trivial for the corp to take an agenda or agendas. Matt, remember, they can do this at least twice a turn, and take, let's say they take a government takeover, which is a 6-point agenda, and they can put that on the bottom of their deck. And now as long as the corp doesn't shuffle their own deck, and as long as the runner doesn't shuffle their deck, this card is never going to be accessed for the rest of the game. Which I think is I don't want to say a problem, but is a thing that makes me the most worried about this card. In Netrunner, runners basically have two win conditions. The main one that happens most of the time is steal 7 points of agendas, while they can also deck, of course, they can deck the corp. The corp can have no more cards to draw. However, on the corp side, there's a lot more different win conditions. Sure, you can score it to 7 points, but there's been a lot of decks over the last couple months that they're considered, or they're called prison decks. And prison decks are decks that attack the runner in different ways. They attack them through net damage, through cards like what do we have here? Like bioethics and hostile infrastructure, and they put these on the table and they're impossible to trash and they keep coming back, and eventually they can build a board state which the runner can combat and the runner slowly dies. We've also seen these decks out of Gagarin if you're playing things in Wayland that have decks that just every time you run you'll be hit by a hard-hitting news, which I gotta pull these cards up, and then from that you're gonna hit you're gonna get killed from meat damage. Like, these are decks that are very good. They've won regionals, they do well competitively, and majority of people don't have fun playing against them. Now think of a deck. These sort of decks don't want to score agendas, so it's very easy to make a Wayland deck that has a government takeover and then, like, I think the math is 5 other 3-point agendas. And if you can get these into hand, which you can actually kind of trivially if you're playing something like Fast Track, you can fast track an agenda, a 6-pointer, maybe you have a 3-pointer in hand, and you can put 9 points of agendas on the bottom of your R&D. And as long as you don't shuffle the deck, now there's only, I think there's only 4 more agendas in your deck, and the runner has to steal 3 of them, which is really scary. The idea that I can play a corp deck that's going to attack you in a way in which I'm going to try and grind you out and kill you, and if you're not teched against that, the best option you have is get accesses and win and steal agendas. But now I'm saying that my agenda only has 4 agendas in it, and you have to steal 3 of them. Admittedly, maybe you only steal 2 of them if you play something like Mad Dash or Freedom Through Equality, but the idea is that I can take a deck that didn't want to score agendas anyways and make you have to steal 3 of 4 of the remaining agendas is nuts. That might actually be an issue, and I think this card is going to have a really, really, really strong place in a lot of prison decks that have no interest in scoring agendas. Now, of course, if the corporation shuffles their own R&D, that agenda that was on the bottom of the deck, basically out of the game, is now going to be shuffled in. And so now the runner has a more honest chance of stealing 7 points. But as long as the corp doesn't shuffle their own deck, which they have full control over, it comes down to the runner being able to shuffle the corp's deck. And there's not a lot of options to do that. This is basically the only card in Netrunner that lets the runner shuffle the corpse R&D, and this is a very valuable card. However, this card in 2-3 months is going to be cycling out the same way Jackson Howard cycles out. So in 2-3 months, if we don't see more cards that shuffle R&D, this card might be a big deal because you can take agendas and put them out of the game, basically out of the game. Just for honesty, there is another card that shuffles R&D, but it's Analog Dreamers. This card isn't fantastic. It might get some value in the near future because of this, specifically also against prison decks, but this is the only other card that shuffles R&D. There's a shout out for this card, Showing Off, which lets you access agendas from the bottom of R&D. So if the runner or the corp uses Whampoa to put 2 cards on the bottom of R&D, 9 points of agendas, and then you Showing Off twice or Showing Off in medium, yeah, maybe you win the game. And there's a chance that the just existence of Showing Off is like a release valve on the power level of Whampoa Reclamation. But even if that's the case, having it be a 3 influence Anarch or run event, as opposed to something that's kind of universally accessible, let alone good in other matchups, makes me kind of worried about this being a silver bullet, let alone like a potent silver bullet against this. We've also seen this ability before. Oops, what did I do? We've kind of seen this ability before in this card called Shanon Claire, which let you find an agenda and put it on the bottom of your deck, yet this never really got out of hand when it comes to burning agendas. I'm not entirely sure if that's why exactly it is. You don't get that much value out of Shanon Claire, it only fires once, and then most decks are shuffling their R&D, but I think in the near future, without Jackson Howard around, this might be better. Also, Shanon Claire lets you find that agenda from the bottom of R&D if you want it, so these 2 cards do work well together. We've also seen this ability to put agendas on the bottom of R&D before with things like Daily Business Show and also Sensei's Active Union, and these cards were very, very good, and putting agendas out of the game is like, it's a really big thing. This card's also 2 influence, which a lot of people look at that and think like, okay, well, that's a lot of influence, so I'm kind of worried about playing this like it's not a fantastic card, and I don't think this card is fantastic in any matchup besides the real prison-y thing, the kind of thing that doesn't actually care to score to 7 points, because this card is relatively expensive. Compared to Jackson Howard, it has twice as much influence, it's a lot more money to res, it's in fact actual money to res, 3 credits isn't cheap. But if you're playing a deck that can spam horizontally, you generally run copies of Tech Startup, and Tech Startup will allow you to find the single copy of Whampoa Reclamation you're running, and if you have 6 points of agendas in hand, it's very easy to get full value of that's Whampoa Reclamation and not lose the game. And I think Tech Startup and a single Whampoa is good. Also, a comparison to Jackson Howard is Whampoa doesn't remove itself from the game like Jackson Howard does. So as soon as this thing is in archives, you can just Friends in High Places it back, and then take 2 other agendas or 2 other cards and put them on the bottom of your R&D. Friends in High Places is terminal, so it ends your action phase, but I'm pretty sure that in the discard phase, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure in your discard phase, you have a paid ability and a ability window, so you can still res Whampoa Reclamation after it's been friendsed in, and still use its ability. That's kind of really, really, really good. Yeah, it's kind of a big deal. This card also gets a lot of value in Industrial Genomics because this gives you an ability to not only bury an agenda, perhaps, but also to take a card and put it face down into archives, which makes everything stronger in Industrial Genomics. And Industrial Genomics is kind of the prison deck that wants this. It will admittedly miss Jackson Howard, but that's something. This card seems to me very familiar to Museum of History. And in fact, it's actually really good with, sort of good with Museum of History. It's not perfect because Museum of History shuffles your R&D, but just the existence of these 2 cards, because Museum of History, mind you, is now unique, so you can only fire it once a turn. However, there were these Gagarin combo decks that when Museum of History wasn't unique, you would shuffle 2 cards from your archives into R&D, and that allowed you to do these ridiculous power turns where you used Mumbet City Hall to search for an alliance card, and you play Consulting Visit, and you use Consulting Visit to play an operation, something like Hard-Hitting News perhaps, or Diversified Portfolios, and this was a combo that you could fire every turn as long as you could shuffle 2 cards from archives back into R&D. You can't do that anymore because Museum of History is now eroded to be unique, but with Museum and Whampoa, it's back on board. It really is back on board, and those combos they now exist again. Admittedly, putting an agenda on the bottom of R&D is not very good if you're shuffling them, but it's still fine because you get them out of HQ, and as long as you can protect protect R&D, perhaps you don't actually have to protect HQ at all if there's never going to be agendas in them, because as soon as they show up, Whampoa will bury them. Also, I just want to shout out to the flavor text on this card. They put bodies and waste in the ground as fast as they pull minerals out, and I think that's absolutely fantastic considering the flavor of this card of burying stuff. There's also value in this card because you're putting cards on the bottom of R&D, and thank God Power Shutdown has been eroded, that you can only trash amount of the highest installed cost of the hardware program, because in theory this card actually enables power shutdown into accelerated diagnostics combos very heavily, and they still do. If there's a card that lets you draw massively on their corpse side, something like Bug Out Bag perhaps, you can now easily set up accelerated diagnostics combos with Whampoa, because you just trash a card, put it on the bottom of R&D, and as long as you put 3 operations of your choice on the bottom of R&D, you can accelerate diagnostics them as long as you get your deck to the bottom 3 cards, and I think that's very weird. It's probably good too. We just need a really strong draw card. Perhaps we have to play Panic Button. Maybe in CI, maybe not in CI, but this actually could work. Now, these are all my things of why I'm kind of negative about this card. This card basically takes a win condition that the runner had and puts it so far out of reach. Taking agendas and putting on the bottom of your deck might just be an issue. But like, if we're talking about this card outside of that and just as a utility card, it's honestly not that bad either. The idea that you can trash a card from HQ just to put a card back into R&D, you're never going to draw that card, mind you, unless you shuffle it. So it's good with other shuffle effects, things like, not Daily Business Show, things like, what else have we talked about? Oh yeah, Museum History, it's really good with stuff like that. But it also lets you like throw out garbage cards that you've drawn that aren't particularly good and put things back in your deck. As long as you're shuffling, you're going to find them. So say it's like mid-game and you've drawn a crappy piece of ice, you've drawn your Quandary, you've drawn your Vanilla, you can now throw it out and now get your Friends in High Places back in your deck. Something like that. Like this is this is recursion. And recursion has generally been a problem with the design of Netrunner. This card may not look as strong as Jackson Howard from like a distance, but I'm pretty sure that this card can be kind of not very nice and can be a really strong thing in prison decks. Decks that just don't want you to score agendas, because now this is a pretty good utility card, and you have to trash it, right? Like you have to run and you have to trash it. And if you trash it, it will be coming back, but if you don't trash it, they can bury more things, and soon all the agendas can be basically out of the game as long as they don't shuffle their deck. And if all the agendas are out of the game, what do? Hold on? And then games and tournaments go to time a lot? Like, perhaps this card won't be good in tournament settings just because games will go too long, but I am a bit worried about this design. Any card that says basically take an agenda, put it out of the game at will, might be a problem. And if you compare that, of course, to like, I closed these now, but to Daily Business Show, that card wasn't at will. You can Friends in High Places this and get agendas out of the game, and that's kind of nuts. That's Whampoa Reclamation. I'm kind of a bit worried about this. I'm going to keep an eye on this card. I'm not a big fan of prison decks. I don't like playing them, but I think this might actually be a really big deal, so we're going to go back to the beginning of the pack and start here with Warroid Tracker. So this is an upgrade. It's a Warroid upgrade. It's 2 to res. It's 4 to trash. Wow. And it says whenever the runner trashes one or more cards in or protecting the server, including the tracker itself, you launch a trace 4. If successful, the runner must trash 2 of their installed cards. It's also 2 influence, so it's very splashable. I did a bit of research before and I couldn't actually find out what Warroid meant. I think it just means War Byroid. I think there was a game on the MSX, yeah, called Warroid back in like the 1984. But otherwise I couldn't find any other reference to that, so hopefully I'm not missing something here. So yeah, what does this card do? It is somewhat a defensive upgrade. In fact, could be considered an offensive upgrade, interestingly enough. Now, the text here is really important. The runner must trash 2 of their installed cards. That's their choice. So they're generally going to choose the ones that are the least impact. I still think that's a very potent effect. Generally, if people are playing good, quote-unquote, decks, they're often not installing more cards than they need. They'll generally install only the stuff that they need, only the stuff that they find relevant in this matchup. So regardless of what they're trashing, it's probably going to be a big tempo hit. And trace 4 and a 4 trash asset, that is nuts. I said this many times before that we're getting so many HB upgrades and so many HB assets specifically that have this really absurd res cost to trash cost ratio, which kind of encourages Netrunner to push in a way where it's actually you get more value for your credits or to tax up the runner's credits if you just install these things without ice half of the time. Because if you put Warroid Tracker and you put it on top of something that the runner deems they must trash, may it be something like a Jeeves, model Byroid, look how much money they have to deal with this. It's 5 credits to trash the Jeeves, 4 credits to trash this. You have to beat a trace 4, which is something that the corp can boost into. And how much money did the corp pay for this? 4 credits. And how much money did the runner have to pay to this so they don't lose the fast advance? Somewhere around like 14? That's crazy. For 2 clicks, that is the most you can tax a runner out for your time. Like, that's more efficient than putting ice on a server a lot of the time. Admittedly, ice gets better if the runner has to run it multiple times, but at least for 1 click, that's a flawed argument. Whatever. This is kind of nuts. Now, Warroid Tracker trashes on everything, including itself. So if there's a res Warroid Tracker and a res Jeeves, you definitely want to trash the Warroid first, so the trace fires, and then you trash the Jeeves. That actually makes it very interesting, because now the Corp understands, oh, if I pump to 6, they won't have 5 to trash the Jeeves model Biroids, so it actually makes it very hard to deal with both of these cards at the same time. You generally either have to have a good link, or way more money than the Corporation. Otherwise, the Corp is always going to be advantaged, because they understand how much money they have to sink into this. And that might be an issue. On top of that, this card pairs really well on the same sort of idea. This pairs really well with Ash, because if you do a trace on Ash, firstly, the Corp is going to be able to understand how much money they have to force you to spend. And if you fail to trace on Ash, you can only access Ash. And if you can only access Ash, you can only trash Ash. And if you can only trash Ash, Warroid Tracker can't be trashed, and then Warroid's going to fire. And these two cards together seem really brutal. Very, 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 very strong. I find it ridiculous that some of the best cards that we have with traces are actually not Nbn cards. They're actually almost all HB cards that have really strong trace 4 effects. We don't have a defensive trace upgrade in Nbn. It's kind of weird. Also, this card pairs so damn well, talk about good trace cards, with Helion Beta Test. Because if someone has to run into a server to trash like a Sand City Grid, a card that if you don't deal with, you generally lose the game, as long as you can't stop fast advance. You have to trash the Warroid Tracker, trash the Sansan, generally beat the Warroid Trace, and then next turn there's another trace that trashes 2 more cards. So all in all, there can be like in one turn basically 4 cards can be ripped up on the runner side of the board, and that is absurd. I think this card is absurd. It's also non-unique, so you can put 3 of these in the same server, they'll all fire. And as soon as you have 2 of them, it's absurd, because you trash the first Warroid, then the 2 Warroids fire twice, and then it's nuts. It's honestly absolutely nuts. Interestingly enough, this also is a Biroid subtype, so you can res it for free with Architects of Tomorrow if you're having fun with that ID. It also combos well with things that you maybe don't want to trash sometimes. This is Prisek, an ambush, and if you hit this, you take a tag and a meat damage. Now the question is, do I trash this for 3 and then do a trace 4 and then, or do I run this again and just take another tag and a meat damage? Like, it makes things interesting. It's also a trace, so Aryabhata Tech gets some value with it. You can also play this in Making News. I don't know how good that is, but this is now a trace 6. All in all, I think this card's absolutely absurd. It might be a really big deal. I think it's another card to go into the asset of horizontal HB decks. It's cool if you put this in a server that has a lot of trashables. Actually, it's probably not the best if you do that, because it'll just trash the Warroid itself first. So I don't know. You could also put this in together with an Oaktown Grid, which makes the trash cost of this thing higher. So the problem with the Oaktown Grid is you generally always trash the Oaktown first before you get to the other things. But now this makes it a lot harder, because it's like, do I trash the Oaktown first and then I have to do 2 Warroid Tracers? I think that's kind of nuts. All in all, I just don't get how HB keeps getting these low res cost, high trash cost cards of such high impact. They've gotten like 2 or 3 in a row in this cycle. Maybe in the last couple cycles they got like 6. It's kind of nuts. And sort of these Estelle Moon horizontal decks are getting really good. They're winning regionals. They're very, very strong decks, and this might just be another piece for him. This card is good. It's really good. I don't know whether it's going to change runner decks, and runners now when they play against HB are just going to install garbage on purpose, just so they don't have to deal with this. I don't know. It's really strong. Oh yeah, one counter to this card, Salset Slums. If you Salset Slums a card, you're not technically considered trashing it, because it's not the ordinal event of trashing it, so it removes it from the game, and Warroid Tracker does not fire. So that's your saving grace, is play those Anarch cards. Play them good Anarch cards. We have another HB card here, and this one's really interesting. This is a unique piece of ice, always exciting to see unique ice, and it's Loki. Loki is 6 to res, 3 strength, ice, only a Biroid, no other subtypes. So if you do not have a breaker that can break unsubtyped stuff, so basically AI breakers, you're not going to be able to break Loki. Not entirely though, because when the runner encounters Loki, you get to choose another res piece of ice, and until the end of the run, Loki gains the subtypes of that ice and the subroutines of that ice before all Loki's other subroutines. So this thing basically becomes something else. It also has a subroutine already on it, and that subroutine is actually really good. It says end the run unless the runner shuffles their entire grip into their stack, so goodbye hand. It's also 5 influence, which is kind of par for the course for most of the unique ice in this game, especially or in faction unique ice. I forgot to look this up, but Loki is a Norse trickster god. Yeah, I thought Marvel was going to come up. Marvel did come up. Mythology. Yeah, it's normally shown with horns. I forget, it's been a while since I read up my Norse mythology, but I think he was tricked into drinking poison. Something about that. I'm probably totally wrong. But yeah, Loki is the god. Trickster God, this makes sense. This should make sense. So, what is this ice? This ice is a Biroid, mind you. So again, Architects of Tomorrow, I closed that tab, but that's an ID that reses for super cheap, which is really good. But it is an ice that can gain the subroutines of another piece of ice. And how good is that? Because on its own, this ice doesn't have good numbers on it. 6 to res is a lot. A lot of times that's on the upper scale, if not the most expensive ice in a lot of decks, specifically HB decks. 6 is generally the upper limit a lot of the times. And it's only 3 strength. And 3 strength puts it at an awkward spot. 3 strength means a couple things. Let's see, let's just open that up. 3 strength means that it can be dealt with a lot of the fixed strength breakers. And admittedly, not a lot of fixed strength breakers are that popular for some reason. But Yogg can deal with this. If this gains the subroutines of a code gate, and HB has a lot of good code gates, you're going to be able to break this for free, which is pretty garbage. But otherwise, even if they're running a Mimic, this can deal with that relatively cheaply. You pay 1 per subroutine, which isn't bad at all. Isn't at all that bad. So on its own, a 3 strength ice is generally just at the point where it's considered, do we play this or do we not play this? But I think this card is interesting enough. Now, the one combination with this card is by far the best and actually makes this card kind of absurd is if you gain the subroutines and subtypes of a card that doesn't have a type on it. This is Excalibur, so if there's an Excalibur rezzed and a Loki is rezzed, when the runner hits a Loki, you can gain the subtypes of Excalibur, which is not Sentry, Barrier, or Code Gate, and then it gains its subroutines. So you have a piece of ice with no type that says the runner cannot make another run this turn, and they have to end the run unless they throw out their entire hand, which is very good. If they're not running an AI, it's also 3, mind you. Like 3 strength is sometimes good for AIs because it makes admin not great, but regardless, this is a really good combination. And I think if you're running Excalibur in the HB deck, you probably want to run Loki. If you're running Loki, you probably want to run Excalibur because together, this is kind of disgusting. This is the best case scenario, I think. All the other sort of pseudo-typeless stuff doesn't really work because like Mother Goddess, which would maybe be in what you think of when you see this, actually will have subtypes. So it's like relatively bad. So what do you do with this? Otherwise, what do you do with this? I think you can gain just about any other subtype. Like you can mimic. You can copy most anything and it's probably okay. This is Fairchild 3.0. If you gain Fairchild 3.0 or if you Loki into Fairchild 3.0, you have 3 subroutines. And well, 4 subroutines altogether, which isn't too bad. That means that this card is about 1 credit cheaper to break generally than Fairchild 3.0, which isn't terrible at all. But with the biggest difference is that the runner can't click through Fairchild 3.0. And that's the coolest thing about Loki is that it's a Biroid that doesn't have this text at the top where the runner can click through the ice. Which means that the runner is going to have a breaker to deal with this. And a lot of times in Netrunner, when playing against HB, a very good strategy is to face plant or face check into ice. Because a lot of the ice is Biroids, a lot of the Biroids you can click through, and sometimes making the corp spend money is good. If there is a Fairchild 3.0 on the table and you run into a Loki and you don't have your code gate breaker installed, this is a really bad face check. Not only will it end the run, unless you want to throw your whole grip out, which is probably really bad, but all these subroutines will fire, and they're relatively really good subroutines. I think this is good. As much as you're losing 2 strength, you are getting 1 subroutine, and all in all, as long as no one's playing Yogg.0, that's not too bad. I think Fairchild is also really good. It's not as great, in fact, as Fairchild 3.0, because when you face check into this, it does nothing. But I think that's one of the best things you can do with Loki, is that if you're going to have an ice with low strength, you might as well just put a lot of subroutines on it. So anything with a lot of subroutines is generally pretty good. Ichi 1.0 is another really good example of things to do, just because if there's an Ichi res on the table, the runner might think, okay, well, if I run and hit another Ichi, I'll just click through it. And that's not the case when you hit a Loki Ichi, because you can't click through these trash programs and they're actually going to fire. And that's actually relatively sweet. Otherwise, other cards like Cobra, I think anything that has good subroutines but is like low strength, this technically makes them better. I don't know whether you want to pay 6 credits for a 3 strength Cobra with an end run, I guess, but that's honestly not that bad. A lot of people might look at these and think of all this sort of like trap ice, the ice that don't have subroutines or subtypes are really good. Things like Lab Dog, things like what's it called, Kitsune, things like Data Mine. But a lot of those ice, once the runner hits it, are actually destroyed. So as soon as the runner hits Lab Dog and chooses not to break it, it's trashed. So it's really hard to have a Lab Dog res at the same time that the runner hits a Loki, because generally Lab Dog gets rezzed and gets trashed. There are ways around it, but it's kind of janky. I think the last cool thing about this is that it gains all the subroutines for the end of the run. So if you do play something really weird like Mumbad City Grid, in which you can move the ice around, this thing can gain like a lot of subroutines, right? Because they hit the Loki, it gains 3 subroutines, then they pass it, you move this thing back with Mumbad City Grid. That's kind of cute and fun. All in all, it's definitely an interesting piece of ice. 6 for 3 isn't fantastic. That kind of puts it there in the Lycan territory. The end of run is pretty good, especially turn 1. I think there's a chance that this card can show up in a typeless ice deck. Yeah, Lycan 6 to 3. The idea is that if you only run ice that doesn't have subroutines, so you're running things like Mother Goddess and Excalibur and Loki, you can have end the run subroutines on almost all your like central servers that the runner can't deal with unless they can trash your ice or play an AI. And that's not too bad at all. Not too bad. This won't be a strong end to run though, so like if the runner has to get through this to steal an agenda to land an account siphon, something like this, they can always get through this. They can always use most of their cards in the hand before they hit this, so don't count on it. Bonus points if the runner runs through this and you manage to kill them with something like a snare. That would be cool. But all in all, definitely an interesting piece of ice. At a 6-3, I don't think it'll be in every deck, just because it's pretty expensive for low strength, but it's definitely good. Having clickless Biroids is something that you have to play around now, and I think that's really exciting. Alright, Obokata Protocol. We have seen this card coming from a long way away, and this card also has come up a couple times in unboxings of the past, and it's finally here. This is Obokata Protocol. It is a 5-3 agenda. It's a big ol' agenda. It's an ambush agenda, which is probably the best subtype of anything in this game, just like Snare over here. And it says an additional cost to steal Obokata Protocol, the runner must suffer 4 net damage. That's a lot of net damage. That's a ton of net damage. Just a bit of a story time here. Really, flavor on this card is fantastic. It's named after Haruko Obokata, who is a former stem cell biologist. That's her. And the story behind Haruko Obokata is actually very fascinating. So she was a Japanese stem cell biologist. And mind you, this happened very recently. This happened in like 2014. She claimed that she came up with a process to make stem cells, or technically not stem cells. I'm not very educated about this, but stimulus triggered acquisition of pluripotency cells, STAP cells, which was a big discovery, a big deal. She basically figured out how to take normal cells, and I think you had to bathe them in acid, or you basically had to stress out these cells to create stem cells. And stem cells are really important. They're used in science for developing tissue and stuff like that. And that was a huge deal. She was relatively young when this happened. However, after a bit of discovery, it found out that she faked the whole thing. Found out a lot of her tests weren't replicatable. Found out that some of the images she was using were just like flat out photoshopped, and it was not good. Yeah, it was a problem. She was entirely discredited. They took away her PhD. She lost her degree. I believe even her mentor committed suicide. And this all happened in 2014. This is like a relatively new kind of thing. And she resigned. Yeah, she was working at the Riken Center for Development Biology, and she resigned. And this is named after her, which is really interesting. If you read the flavor text, proper application of stress can create the most profound changes. And I think that's a twofold thing. It's talking maybe about how like they took the cells and like put them in the acid bath to make these new cells. Maybe that's what it's talking about. But this like whole sort of this whole Haruko Obokata story also talks a lot about sort of the stress that's put on people in scientific positions, where they're kind of like, I don't know, there's an article I read about it. What pushes scientists to lie was this Guardian article that the title came out. And that's very interesting, putting someone under stress and see what they sort of have to come up with. I don't know. Obviously what she did probably wasn't good. But this is what it's named after. And as additional cost to steal it, you have to take 4 net damage, which is a lot of net damage. Very important to understand how the wording of this card works. This is a cost. As an additional cost to steal Obokata, you have to suffer the net damage. So if you have a card like Deus Ex that says prevent any amount of net damage, if you use Deus Ex, you can't steal Obokata. So no matter what, 4 net damage is going to hit you in the face, and that's a lot of net damage. Admittedly, not entirely true because of Film Critic. Film Critic says you don't steal agendas, you just kind of post them on there and then you pull them off. So if you have Film Critic and you run into an Obokata Protocol, it does nothing. It's basically a blank 5-3 that says the runner loses 2 clicks, which at their choice. And that's not fantastic. I think that's the worst thing I have to say about Obokata Protocol is that Film Critic is actually like really popular nowadays, just because cards like Hunter Seeker are around, and Hunter Seeker is pretty brutal if you're not prepared for it in certain matchups. So Film Critic is probably the most popular I've ever seen it. So Obokata Protocol is not looking amazing. That being said, you do have access to cards that trash Film Critic. Specifically in Jinteki, you have Voter Intimidation. So as long as you can win a side game after they've taken an agenda, you can get rid of their Film Critic, and maybe that's really, really good for you. But regardless, I'd play Film Critic. This card's around. 4 net damage is huge. If you play some Personal Evolution, the core Jinteki, that's 5 net damage. You're basically saying take 5 net damage to steal an agenda, and that's super gross. If you don't do that really early in your turn, you're not going to have a lot of time to draw up. Even if you put this card like behind, what's it called? Something like Lockdown, and you do 4 net damage and say you can't draw up, that's really gross. And even if you give this agenda over to the runner, you might have built yourself a win condition right there, because if they have 1 or 0 or no cards in hand, it's relatively easy for you to kill them. This card pairs really well with Ben Musashi, a card that's come out recently, because Ben Musashi with Obokata Protocol says if you want to suffer, also mind you this is an additional cost so you can avoid it, you have to take 6 net damage. Admittedly, you can trash Ben Musashi and come back, but you have to probably run through some ice twice, but 6 net damage to take a single 3-point agenda, that's untenable. It's cool how also it takes cards like DNA Tracker or any card that does net damage and sort of makes them an end the run. Because DNA Tracker isn't amazing to score directly behind, because the runner can always run through this to steal a Nisei or whatever agenda you want, but you can't really run through a DNA Tracker to steal an Obokata Protocol. You just can't. And that actually changes a lot, where any double advanced card, heck, any card, even if it's not advanced, you have to think, okay, if this is a Obokata, do I steal it? Do I not steal it? How many cards do I have in hand? And that actually makes it's cool, because the existence of the card raises the skill cap in the Jinteki matchup, and I like that a lot. Also totally worth knowing, any card, any agenda, and there's not many of these in the game, that has an additional cost to steal it, you can refuse. So if you hit an Obokata Protocol and you have 4 cards in hand and you think, no, not now, please, you can just not touch it. You can say, I'm going to access it, I'm not going to steal it, and it could stay on the table. So this card will never technically put you in a position that's losing you the game if you don't want it to, and I think that's a very cool way to balance this card, because otherwise this card would be fucking nuts. No cards in hand at the end of the turn, and how do you capitalize on that? You have things like Ronin on the table. If you have a Ronin Advance, now you can kill the runner if they have less than 3 cards in hand. This card's also a really good target for Mushin Notion, because if you Mushin on the table and they don't run it, you gain 3 points. If they do run it, they just took 4 net damage. And if you're playing Personal Evolution, 5 net damage, and that actually might just be what you need. I think that's really good. I think this card also just goes really well together with Punitive Counter-Strike, and not a lot of people will expect this, because if they steal this thing, they take 4 net damage, maybe 5 net damage in Personal Evolution. If you have the money, you're going to do 3 more damage on their turn. That could be lethal. This could be how you win a game. If they're playing against net damage, they might not be expecting meat damage, and this is awesome. This card's really solid. It's a good 3-5. Generally, the only 3-5s that see play in this game are 3-5s that are defensive in some way, just because the variance on hitting a 3-5 is huge, and this is the kind of card that you need to see play. I think this is a really cool design, and it's exciting. It actually might mean that you're going to see more net damage decks that actually plan to score to 7 points as opposed to grind the runner out, because you can install double advance this, and even if the runner hits it sometimes, it's okay. But I think you actually have a way to scoring to 7, and that's really cool. All right, moving on for Jinteki. This is Mirāju. It's a code gate. It's a deflector. It's a piece of ice. It's 2 to res, no strength, and it has a single subroutine. It says the corp may draw a card, then shuffle 1 card from HQ into R&D, and it's 2 influence. And that's a fine subroutine, but the text on this card makes it super interesting. It says if the runner breaks the printed subroutine on Mirāju, he or she is now running on archives instead of passing Mirāju, and approaches the outermost ice, if any. However, you have to de-res Mirāju. Mirāju is the Japanese word for mirage, and the image here kind of shows that. It also shows art that's very similar to Shiro and stuff like that, which is kind of interesting, but then again, that's all Jinteki stuff. All the Jinteki defense stuff on R&D is generally look like this. So you have Shiro, you have, what's it called? What is it called? That low strength code gate you put on R&D. Oh man, okay. We'll edit that in. This is a very interesting card. If you break it, it punishes you. If you don't break it, something good happens to the corp. It doesn't end the run, mind you, but it does make accesses a lot worse. Where do you put this card? I don't entirely know where you put this card. I think it looks best on HQ, because if the corp or the runner runs on HQ, you res this, and they have either 2 choices. Either go on to archives, which they approach the ice on archives, so they're going to have to break ice. It's also going to give you an opportunity to res ice, which is good in certain matchups. But they're going to have to break ice or deal with what you have in archives. Mind you, this card, while looking similar, let me close some of these tabs, is actually relatively different to Susanoo no Makoto. Susano has this clause that says a runner can't jack out until they encounters a piece of ice. Well, this one doesn't say that, so this means after you approach the first piece of ice and you've dealt with it or it wasn't rezzed, you can always jack out. Susano no Makoto got some value because if there's no ice in our archives, the runner couldn't jack out, so you could feed them shocks and stuff like that in archives. With Mirāju, that's never going to happen. You're going to deflect the run, which is really good, but yeah, they can always just jack out if they don't want to access, and that's yeah, it's not amazing, but it's still a cool card. So if you put this on HQ and the runner runs it, and they don't want to run on archives because they want to run HQ, you can draw a card and then shuffle a card from HQ on R&D. That's the best ordering of those two clauses because you get the full information and then you shuffle something away. It also gives you no opportunity to draw the card that you just shuffled. But what do you want to shuffle into R&D? Agendas. If I'm running HQ with a legwork, if I'm running HQ just for a single axis and you have a couple agendas in R&D, you're going to want to shuffle them away, and this card gives you that ability. It's also really cheap to break, but at the end of the day, if you break it, you're not going to be running HQ anymore, and that's really solid. Even if you put these on R&D, even if you put this on any other server, it's a fine ability. Drawing a card nearly clicklessly, making the runner figure out where to go, it's definitely a very nuanced card, and I think it's exciting. Admittedly, every time the runner breaks this, you're going to have to re-res it, and that can accrue some costs. This card's actually very similar to Chimera, an ice that's sort of suddenly seeing play because of a certain ID we'll talk about in a second. But if the runner doesn't have, if the corp doesn't have a strong economy, the runner actually might break this because they understand that you can't afford to res it 2 more times this game, and that's probably the biggest liability of this card, is that you can't afford to re-res it a bunch of times. There are ways to make that more easy. There are a couple cards that give you credits to res ice, things like dedicated servers or Mamba Temple, but I think Akutaro Watanabe is probably the most fun. This lets you res this thing for free. Sure, Akutaro might be trashed, but it's cool. I like Akutaro. One of in the core set. Very, very strong card, huh? I'm most excited about this card because of Ag Infusion, and Ag Infusion is a really exciting idea. I've been having a lot of fun with it, and Ag Infusion gets a lot of value from cards that can de-res themselves. The idea is that if you have this on a central server, like deep in a central server, further down in the ice server, the runner might break this at some point in the game, and now it's de-resed, which means that it's a card that you can trash with Ag Infusion to make the runner run on a different server. So it is a piece of ice that gets value in this ID regardless if it's resed or regardless as if it's de-resed. I think a lot of the time in Ag Infusion, you might just want to let the corp never de-res this thing. You might want to always let it fire, just because as soon as it's de-resed, it probably is a bigger deterrent than not. Of course, you can play Employee Strike to not deal with this, but then again, let's try and have fun here. Yeah, it's a really strong ability. It's very cool. Notice how this says don't put a card on the bottom of R&D. It says to shuffle it up, which means the agenda they put is not going to be out of the game, which excites me. All in all, it's good. Card gets a lot less value against Los, though, because there's a lot of way to make free money all the time, and I think the best way to deal with this is probably Parasite, because if you just trash it, it's gone. It's 0 strength. That's generally how this sort of ice is balanced. Not many people run Parasite, though, so I don't know. Lastly, we have Midori, and Midori is really cute with this card, because if it's rezzed or if it's face down, either way you can get some value out of it. If the runner might think like, oh, that's a Mirāju, I know what it is, I'll run an account siphon through this, and at the last minute, maybe you swap it for something better. I don't know. Then you have your Mirāju back unrezzed in HQ to reposition it. I just want Midori to be good, I'll be honest. It's an exciting piece of ice. It's a really interesting design. It lets the runners have some cool decision, has the corps have some cool decision. I like this sort of design. I'm excited for Mirāju. Let's play some Ag Infusion. Alright, we have one more Jinteki card. This is Shipment from Tennin. It's 2 to play, it's an operation, and it says you can only play this if the runner didn't make a successful run during the last turn. And simple ability, place 2 advancement tokens on 1 card. It's also 3 influence, so it's relatively splashable. Wow, place 2 advancement tokens on 1 card. Why is that good? That doesn't seem that good, does it? It's really good, in fact. This is Biotic Labor. It's a card that costs twice as much. It's 1 more influence. It doesn't have a condition when you can play it, but gain 2 clicks is really good, because gaining 2 clicks gives you the sort of click compression as equal to playing 2 advancement tokens on 1 card, right? Because this gives you 2 clicks, this puts 2 counters. Biotic Labor is a bit more flexible. But why is that good? It's because you can start fast advancing agendas. If the runner didn't run on the last turn, you can install a Brain Trust, you can advance it once, and then you can Shipment from Tennin out, and now he scored 3 2s. It's a cool way to win. Maybe not a cool way, perhaps, but it's a very potent way to win. It's called a fast advance deck. And you have a couple 3 2s in in Jinteki. You actually have a bunch of 3/2s. This is a 3/2. It does nothing when scored though, so it's a bit underwhelming, but it exists. You have one of Philodic Entanglement. It's a really solid agenda. Being able to fast advance this not only gives you 2 points, might actually win you the game in some circumstances. And you also have Medical Breakthrough, which starts as a 4/2, but eventually will be a 3/2, and even a 2/2 is really strong. And being able to put all these agendas in the same deck might just be a potent fast advance deck. Shipment from Tennin. This actually makes a lot of sense. This is the Tendon Institute, and together, these two abilities, you're kind of going all in on one thing, because if the runner runs, both of these fall apart. This is the Tendon Institute, which came out in Honor and Profit, a deluxe expansion many years ago now. Interestingly enough, when this came out, Tendon Institute was on Mars, so it's cool to see them like continue with that and say like, okay, well, what's up with Tennin? Tennin is on Mars. And Tennin says that if the runner doesn't make a successful run, you get an advancement token. So you can put that on ice, you can technically put that on agendas. It's very good. And together, this is probably the fast advance deck you want to build. I think interestingly enough, also, you might want to consider playing this in Harmony Medtech. While Harmony Medtech, it might not be obvious, and I think that's kind of the worst thing you have going for Tendon Institute, is when you see a Tendon Institute, it's in your best interest to run every single turn, just to turn off this ability, and when you're turning off this ability, you're also turning off this ability. So it might actually be in your best interest to run a different ID, just so people don't expect it. Admittedly, once you play the first one, they'll see it coming. But the idea with Harmony Medtech is you can run 3/2s and just Shipment from Tennin them out, and you only need to score 3 to win the game, as opposed to Tennin, which still needs to score 7 legit points. And I think that's pretty interesting. You might want to try that out. Also, for what it's worth, you can score 3/1 agendas. It doesn't have to be a 3/2, and there's some 3/1 agendas that are actually really strong in this game. I think genetic resequencing is actually really good with Nisei Mark II, and you might want to look at that. There's also a lot of really strong Jinteki 3/1s, and even neutral 3/1s, so pick what you like. This card also comes for this, like, the next 3 months. This card seems to be the natural replacement of Trick of Light, a card that's not going to exist that much longer because it's going to cycle out. And for this, like, sweet little window, we have both of these cards in the card pool. So if you make a Tendon Institute deck, you'll actually have a lot of ways to fast advance out, and that's really exciting. So how do you make sure the runner doesn't make a successful run on their turn? You got to keep them out. That's one way, but there's also a bunch of cards to help you deal with that. This is Caprice Nisei. It's unique, only on one server, but you basically can turn any server to a pretty hard gamble of whether or not they can get in. Crisium Grid, it's also only one influence and is a pretty good card regardless. And you can put this on any server, and even if they trash Crisium Grid, that run that they made was not considered successful. In some cases, it's actually good to put Crisium Grid on a remote server just behind ice, and even if the runner runs it, it's not considered successful. This card's also really good on central servers just because it stops so many run events and so many things that require successful runs. For archives, you have Crick. That's really cool. You have Crick. Crick's good. You put that on archives, and that's fine. This is a very solid card. I actually think, just like we said before with biomedical, biomedical. Oh man, I forget what that ID is called already. But this card's actually probably really good in other decks too, specifically decks that you don't expect it or can get other value from it. Shipment from Tennin is good in Ag Infusion because a lot of times Ag Infusion will be at a board state where they have unrezzed ice, and they want you to run to get their ice rezzed, at least one piece of their ice rezzed, so their ability turns on. Either that, there is a point where they have a big rezzed ice somewhere, and then you don't want to run because you know that you'll bounce into it. So you can actually get some really good value from Shipment from Tennin. Other cards you have, Titan Transnational. It's actually really good to have more ways to fast advance in this deck, just because scoring a Project Atlas, even from hand, gets a token, and then next turn you can find another Project Atlas or another Shipment from Tennin and hopefully keep the train going. That's very good. Jemison Astronautics, if you need ways to get your agenda scored so you can forfeit them, this is not bad. This is one influence cheaper than Biotic Labor, as much as it is a bit conditional. I think, as crazy as this is, you might be able to get away with this in Blue Sun. Any deck where the runner doesn't run often because you have big ice can get some value out of this. Even Sync. I think Sync's really cool because you can, sometimes you just ice only central servers to pull some sort of combo out, and if you have punishing ice, the runner might not run, and being able to fast advance out of breaking news and then play like closed accounts or something, maybe that's worth doing. I don't know. I think this card is much more flexible than it looks. It's one influence and half the cost of Biotic Labor cheaper. I think you can do this. I also like this card better in some ways than Biotic Labor because there is some natural counterplay built into this. If you're playing in a meta where you know Shipment from Tennin is everywhere, or in the opponent's deck, you just run and you start to make unoptimal runs, which is very interesting for both the runner and the corp, but it changes how you play the game. And I like it when cards have like built-in counterplay as opposed to like having to play silver bullets in your deck. I think that's very exciting. I like the design of this card. Also, for what it's worth, you can sometimes get some cheeky kills with advanceable cards. If they don't expect like 2 advances for a certain click, maybe you can kill with a Ronin. I don't know. Definitely an interesting card. Very strong. Jiteki Fast Advance might just be a thing. We've hit the Nbn cards. Give me 1 second. I've been talking a lot. Alright, on the Nbn side, we have 2 agendas. This is the first one. This is Escalate Vitriol. It's a 4-2. It's an initiative agenda, so that means careful if you're playing against the Archivist. And it has a very simple ability. It says gain 1 credit, spend a click, gain 1 credit for each tag the runner has. It only uses ability once per turn. And is a text, of course, words hurt from Bex Gleason. Bex Gleason is a character that's appeared in some of the Android Netrunner books and some of the fiction, and it's cool to see him. I don't know if that's him on the screen, though. I'm not actually sure. Maybe it is. I like the art on this one a lot of good colors. Also protested Ag Infusion. Yeah, good world building there. Alright. So what does this card do? This card punishes having a lot of tags. It punishes the runner from having a lot of tags. Mind you, in any matchup that you can't give the runner a lot of tags, it does nothing. It honestly does nothing. It does nothing when scored, nothing when stolen, and that's kind of bad. However, if you can give the runner some tags, this card does get a lot of value very quickly. How do you give the runner a lot of tags? Well, there's not that many cards that do that. Firstly, the runner might give himself a lot of tags. If you're playing against a deck that like runs a lot of count siphons over and over again and they're floating tags for some reason, well, not for some reason, that's like a valid strategy. It's kind of risky against NBN, but it's a valid strategy. This card gets value. If you manage to score out of 4-2, you can now maybe click for 15, and the entire account siphon econ denial deck is going to fall apart because they cannot no longer deny your economy. Well, actually, if that's the case, they might want to go ahead and play things like Turntable. If this card gets really popular, Turntable. Just Turntable for days. Get rid of it. The other big card that gives some tags, in fact, a lot of tags, it's mid-season replacements. This card isn't that amazing in the meta right now, again, because of the film critic problem we previously talked about. But you can now do some like pretty unsustainable tracing for mid-season's replacements because you can now click the money back. If you even do mid-season replacements and you do trace all of your money, it's actually really good as long as you have an Escalate Vitriol scored. That was kind of a problem with mid-season's replacements. If you mid-seasons the runner and now you have no money, the runner can kind of go hog wild on you. You can't basically pay for anything. You can't res ice a lot of the time besides really cheap ice. And it wasn't a good thing to do. Now this makes it really good because you can do like trace all your money and now the runner will probably take all of the tags and now you can just click for your money back. And then next turn you can click to double your money. And that's really strong. These 2 cards pair very well together. I think if you see Escalate Vitriol, you can expect mid-season replacements and do play around that. The last card is Hard-Hitting News, which doesn't see that much play anymore as much as it is a really, really, really strong card just because tag avoidance is very popular. But in theory, if they don't clear the tags, you can get some value out of this. Admittedly, they have a turn to clear it, but I think mid-seasons is the best. This card is very comparable to Private Security Force, and if you're playing against a deck, or you're playing a deck that's going to for sure tag the runner, I don't know which one's better. Private Security Force is a bit clumsier than it looks, because it's going to take a lot of turns to be able to grind out the runner by like repeatedly smashing that button, and there's a chance Escalate Vitriol is actually a more elegant win condition, and that's because of the existence of Psychographics. Escalate Vitriol means Psychographics is always on. Mid-season decks generally rely, if they're not trying to kill the runner, on Psychographics. And that was the big problem with putting a lot of money into your trace on the mid-seasons, is that you need money to Psychographics. And so now you can for sure, as long as you have one of these scored, always Psychographics away. It's also not bad to Psychographics your Escalated Vitriol to be able to Psychographics anything. And Psychographics is incredibly strong with Project Beal, because if you have a Vitriol scored, the runner has, like, say, at least 13 tags. In fact, they only need 11 tags in this circumstance, or no, 8 tags, I think. Yeah, maybe I didn't. 9 tags. You can just click this thing and then Psychographics Beal for 9 and win the game. And that's not too bad at all. It's really not too bad at all. Interestingly enough, this card actually does get value with Media Blitz. If you can't manage to score it and the runner's playing heavily Tag Me, you can actually feed them one of these and then Media Blitz and then click this once. And you'll get a lot of money. You'll get your money back, in fact, and that might be all it takes to put you back. Maybe you only want to play 1 Vitriol in a Tag Me deck and then you fast track for it and you feed it to the runner even. I'm not sure. But this card definitely does something in those matchups. Interestingly enough, I think that this card is going to get a lot more value. It might not look amazing now just because there's not a lot of decks that bury people in tags, but based off of my research and sort of the decks that I've been playing competitively as of late, I am pretty confident that sort of this like massive tag me Anarch deck, which doesn't exactly exist yet, but I think is going to get a lot better with the next data pack, next maybe 2 data packs, is going to be very popular relatively soon. These sort of like data leak reversal decks, the decks with Joshua B, decks that like want to tag themselves pretty heavily, might become a thing. And so if that is the case, Escalate Vitriol might be a very strong meta decision, and actually might be the thing that NBN needs just to make sure it doesn't lose to all these sort of tag things. It's kind of unfortunate how the one faction that's already pretty good at punishing tags gets more things to punish tags, but I guess that's kind of why it's their speciality. But I'd love to see this sort of release valve card maybe be a bit easier to splash. Again, you can't splash agendas. I don't know if I entirely agree with that, but it's, yeah, it makes psychographics good. Maybe that's exactly why it exists. Sync. I pulled this up because Sync is already good against Data Leak Reversal, so maybe you'll play Sync and you play this, and then you're good against your DLR matchup. Not entirely sure. We're moving on to another agenda. This is Reeducation, which is a 5/3. It's another really big agenda. And it's an initiative agenda, so again, Archivist, what's up? And it says when you score Reeducation, add any number of cards from HQ to the bottom of R&D and draw that many cards. The runner randomly adds the same number of cards from their grip to the bottom of stack, if able. Again, this is like the second time in this pack that we've seen add cards to the bottom of the stack, or bottom of R&D. That's not a thing I like in Netrunner a lot of times because you're putting agendas out of the game. Maybe that's the strength of this 5/3. I'm not entirely sure. So what does this card do? It does something like this. And this is actually the second agenda we've seen with a very similar ability. This is a brain rewiring, which came out in Terminal Directive. And they both basically say, score these things, and then make this one, Reeducation lets you get rid of cards to get new cards. It kind of just like shuffles through your deck, or it cycles through your deck, and then basically make the runner get rid of cards from their hand. I think Reeducation is not very easy to play. I don't think it's fantastic, and I think it's the same thing with brain rewiring, where the best thing about Reeducation and the best thing about brain rewiring is I only think they're ever going to see play, if at all, inside decks that are trying to kill the runner. Yeah, because decks that are going to kill the runner, on the basis that if the runner has 1 or no cards in their grip, they're very easy to kill. Very easy to kill. And that's kind of the best thing we have going for this. Again, this comes up every time we talk about 5/3s. 5/3s in Netrunner are very hard. It's very hard for a 5/3 in Netrunner to see play. It has to do one of 2 things. It either has to be defensive in some way, like Obokata Protocol is a pretty good example, a card that kind of defends itself, or it has to have an ability that when scored is game changing. And this is the first one I think we've honestly seen it somewhat like that, and this card isn't that popular on its own. And because Elective Upgrade, basically once you score it, as long as you score it first, mind you, does give you a way to win the game. Reeducation doesn't do that much. It does a bunch of weird stuff, and it doesn't like help you win the game unless you're going to combo this off into a kill. Otherwise, it's just like a bunch of good things happen. And I think a really weird thing about this, considering we've seen brain rewiring and we've seen Reeducation at the same time, it's important to understand that Netrunner cards are tested and designed about a year and a half in the past. And then a year and a half later, they get released. And I think there might be a chance that at this point in time, there was Faust. Faust was this card and it was everywhere, and the designers of FFG might have seen this and been like, okay, well, we want more agendas or more cards that attack the grip, so that Faust isn't good, and then they printed these 2 agendas, which I don't even think are very good against Faust, but that might kind of be why. Yeah. I don't have much to say about this. The fact that it cycles your hand is cool, but the fact that it gets rid of cards from the runner's grip is anti-synergistic with Sweeps Week, admittedly. But if they have no cards in hand, they're easy to kill. So I think the only combo that I can see with this card is that you can play with 24/7 News Cycle. So if you score this agenda, you have to score it, and now you can forfeit another agenda which you had to score to play 24/7 News Cycle to resolve the when scored ability. So you can fire the when scored ability on this. You can trash most of your hand. I think you have to draw once. Like I think you draw once, and then you have to trash all of your hand to force the runner to trash all of their hand, and then you can kill them with a single point of net damage, or if they're tagged, you can kill them easier. But otherwise, I just don't see what you can do with this. 5/3s have to be really good, and this has only the very cheesy win condition attached to it. If there's some combo deck that can score this and fire everything in one turn, then I think that will probably see play. But on its own, it just does a bunch of strange stuff, and that's all I can say about it. Really weird card. Yeah, really weird card. This is a Traffic Analyzer. It's an upgrade. It's nothing to res, 3 to trash. That's a pretty good ratio. 1 influence. All right, it's easily splashable. And it says whenever you res a piece of ice, protecting the server, trace 2. If successful, the corp gains 1 credit. And it has a quote. It's all about monetizing everything. Aaron Niel, who I assume is this person. All right, it's an Econ card. This is a straight Econ card. Every time that you draw a card, you make money. How much money do you think you're gonna get out of this card? I don't think a lot. If we want to paint what's like the best case scenario, like not unrealistic, but a best case scenario, you have this card behind 3 pieces of ice. The runner runs through them. You res all 3 pieces of ice. The runner continues to run through all pieces of ice. You beat every single trace and you pay no money into it, because as soon as you pay money for this trace, you're wasting your time. You're actually not making money. So if that's the case, this card gave you 3 credits. And it required an absurd amount of setup. Like, how much money are you getting out of this card? You're probably gaining 2 to 3 credits. As soon as you start paying for the trace, it's not good. It's in fact really bad. Admittedly, you can play something like Making News that has 2 for a trace, but it's still not great. And then you made 2 to 3 credits. And if you want to compare that to a card like Launch Campaign, which you can just put in any server, and as long as it's not trashed, it is 1 easier to trash, you gain 5 credits. I just don't see why you'd ever play Traffic Analyzer. I really don't. It makes no sense to me. If this said something like stronger and something more interesting, like every time you res a piece of ice, trace 4, if successful, gain 2 or 3 credits, or you actually gain a substantial amount of money, where this actually could take one of the slots in your deck that is just so much easier to put Launch Campaign in, it would be cool, because that would actually like perhaps encourage a weird playstyle in which de-resing your cards was good, because every time you resed, you make more money. And in fact, just gaining 1 credit is just not enough, and is not going to encourage a radical new playstyle that we're unfortunately not going to see. In fact, I think like maybe the best thing about this card, we don't have art, is maybe if Rubicon Switch becomes a huge problem, this helps a bit. But again, if you're spending money on the trace, you're not making credits. So this sort of fights Rubicon Switch, but it's not very good. The best thing I had thinking about this is, in theory, if you have Traffic Analyzer in a server and Chilo City Grid, so a couple cards already, and the runner's running it, and you're resing ice, so right, ice has to be on res, there's a chance that this trace 2 gaining credit also gives the runner a tag, which is kind of cool, but tags admittedly right now aren't amazing because of Aaron Moran existing and New Angel City Hall. That's something. You could pair this, that's Aaron Moran. You could pair this with Rutherford Grid to make a trace 4, but now we're spending 2 cards just to gain 1 credit sometimes. Aryabhata Tech does make this a bit better, but now you have to, like, I don't know, you're icing, still the runner has to run, the traces all have to fire. I think with Aryabhata Tech now it's more in your interest to beat this trace, which means, yeah, you're spending money, but the runner isn't getting money, and you'll lose money anyways. Just so many cards. I thought there might be something cool here with Surat City Grid, where with Surat City Grid, you could like res all your ice on your turn, gain all this money, and then fire things away with give tags with Chilo City Grid, but I realized that Chilo City Grid only works during the run. All in all, I don't know how much credits this card is going to give you. Perhaps you need to play it in a deck that's going to res and de-res ice a lot. Something like Ag Infusion, something that's playing Chimera or Miraju, that gets some value. If you want to play this in like Blue Sun, where you can move it around and res and de-res ice, maybe that gets something. But in all those cases, you're spending so much time and effort to probably gain about 4 or 5 credits, which again, you can just play Launch Campaign. Yeah, I don't know. This card, the numbers on it are just very underwhelming. It's an interesting idea, but I cannot stand behind this one. Again, if this was more money, if this was something, it would actually maybe be interesting and create a new playstyle. But so far, this card has no support, and I don't see what kind of support this could possibly get. All right, this is Meteor Mining. It's a 5-2 agenda. 5-2 isn't something we've seen in a long time. And it says when you score Meteor Mining, you may gain 7 credits. If the runner has at least 2 tags, you may also do 7 meat damage instead. That's a lot of meat damage. I've Got a Rock by Charles Mad Dog Brunn, comic jockey. So this is a reference to an original Netrunner card called I've Got a Rock that was called out. You notice how the art is very similar. I've Got a Rock was pretty ridiculous. It was an asset, I think. Yeah, that's what nodes were, they're assets. And you had to forfeit 3 agenda points to do 15 meat damage. You can only do this if the runner has 2 or more tags. But that was a game-winning card. People build decks around that from my understanding. I think I've Got a Rock is largely like this idea of a massive amount of meat damage if the runner has 2 tags is largely translated to Boom. But now it's also been translated to Meteor Mining. Excuse me. Alright, so let's talk about this card in 2 points. Firstly, you can gain money with this card. How good is that? I don't think it's very good. So if you spend 5 credits advancing this card, at the end of it, you score it, you gain 7. So you gain a net profit of 2 credits only after you manage to score this. So 2 credits for scoring this card. If you want to compare that to Oaktown Renovation, which if you just advance and score this, you gain 4 credits immediately every time you advance this. So even if it's stolen, you don't lose your payoff. Let alone if you advance this up to 5, not only do you score a 2-point agenda, but you have actually gained a profit of 6 credits. So if you're putting this in your deck as an agenda to just make money, Oaktown Renovation, as much as it is public that you have to install it face up, yeah, it's Meteor Mining is really bad compared to Oaktown Renovation. Meteor Mining, even compared to Corporate Sales Team says basically spend 1 less credit scoring it, 1 less click scoring it, and you gain 10 credits. You do get it slowly as a drip economy, which is a bit worse, but this is more to cost, more to score, more credits to advance, and it only gives you 7. I don't get it. I don't understand why this value isn't bigger, especially considering this is a 5-2 agenda. 5-2 agendas are kind of really bad. We've only seen one other 5-2 agenda before, and that was Fetal AI. And Fetal AI is a good card because if you don't steal this, if you don't score this agenda and the runner steals it, it's still pretty good for you. If the runner steals this, nothing happens. It's just kind of bad. So this is in the worst point it could possibly be. If this was a 4-2, it would be better. And even if it was a 5-3, it would be better. But arguably maybe not even better because people don't like running 5-3s. So the economy option to this is not great. It really isn't great. So what about the second part? If the runner has at least 2 tags, you may do 7 meat damage. So you have to give the runner into a situation where you can score this and the runner has 2 tags. And the wildest thing about Wayland is that there's no way to give the runner 2 tags in Wayland. There's very little ways in Wayland to give the runner tags. So you have to splash it. You have to. And there's still very few ways in this game to give the runner 2 tags. The best you got is making news, and that's, breaking news, and that's not a Wayland card. So good luck with that. So what happens? So how do you get the runner tags? Do you mid-seasons them heavily? Because if you do mid-seasons them heavily, they'll have at least 2 tags, which is really good. So maybe you have to play these 2 together, but that's the biggest problem is we've seen this clause before. If they have at least 2 tags, you may do 7 damage instead, and that's boom. And sure, boom is trashable, but this is scoreable, like stealable, sorry. So I think boom is still strictly better. It kind of has value that this card slot not only takes up 2 agendas in your deck, but it also takes up the boom slot. That's kind of cool, but it's so hard to score this thing. Like if the runner has to be massively tagged and you have to spend 2 turns scoring this thing, as opposed to boom, you can just play boom. Also, you can consulting visit for boom, so if it's anywhere in your deck, you can just pay 6 credits and win the game. Well, you have to score this out. What? I honestly don't get anything about this card. I really don't understand it. I think the best thing we have going for it is it's news cyclable because it has a when you score ability. So you could forfeit an agenda, perhaps you forfeit an agenda in Jemison, get some value out of it, and then gain 7 credits. That's okay, I guess. That's not terrible, but overall, you're probably not gonna, like, no. Wow, I made a bunch of weird noises there. I don't understand this card at all. If you have at least 2 tags, I just play boom. And if I want to have a card in my deck that gets credits when I score it, I just play Oaktown Renovation because it's way better. So I don't understand. I also don't understand why this is a 5-2. If it was a 4-2, would there be some degenerate combo? I don't think so. So I think they just erred on the side of conservatism. Like this is kind of nuts. Kind of nuts. Even compare that to Hostile Takeover, which says if you score this, take a bad pub, but also gain 7 credits. And you can score this one from hand. Yeah, I don't know. I really don't get this one. It's cool that we see I've Got a Rock though, but this is like incredibly underwhelming. This card will get a lot better if in the future there's a way for Wayland to give out multiple tags, specifically 2 tags. But for now, you're gonna have to score this thing out the hard way. You're gonna have to give them a tag. You're gonna have to start clicking with Zealous Judge, and it's just like incredibly clumsy, as opposed to just, you know, playing that boom card for 4 credits. I don't get it. We have another agenda. This is Standoff. This is a 2-0 agenda. That's a relatively novel one. And it says when you score a Standoff, each player, starting with the runner, trashes 1 installed card until 1 player declines to trash a card. If that runner declines, draw 1 card and gain 5 credits. This is a true Standoff. I love that art. It seems to be some sort of person with either like I don't know if that's a cane or if that's a religious thing. To me, it looks like that's Wolololo trying to convert like that thing. Age of Empires. But yeah, great art. Weird thing about this card, the text on this thing is like so small. This is like just an FFG formatting fuck up. This is not the standard size for text. It is super tiny. Like, look how big this text is. Look how small this text is. Don't know why that is. Yeah, there's a lot of text on this card, but like there's all this empty space. Don't know what that is. That's just kind of a goof. Yeah, anyways. This card's a bit more interesting than it might look to a lot of people. Because of some rulings of some sorts. This was talked about in the UFAC. So this is Endless Hunger, or this is Endless Hunger, and this is a card that says trash an installed card, break, and end the runs of routine. And somebody actually went to Worlds this year and played this in their deck and went to multiple judges, from my understanding, throughout the tournament, because they would always try to use Endless Hunger and try to trash their opponent's cards. They'd be like, okay, I'm going to use Endless Hunger, I'm going to trash your piece of ice. And the opponent would be like, what? You can do that? And they'd be like, yeah, I think so. It doesn't say you can't. And then a judge would be called in and they'd always rule against it. But this guy, who I've heard is a really nice dude, wasn't trolling, but actually trying to look for a ruling here. They were always told that you can't do it, and from my understanding it was never explicitly stated in the rules why that was, and it might have been added later. I might be wrong on this fact, so don't quote me on it, but the point was that we do have a solid ruling now. And the solid ruling is, if ever you cannot use the opponent's credits or cards to pay costs. So you can't pay this cost on this card by trashing the runner's installed cards. This card is a standoff, so you each take turns trashing stuff. But when we saw this card spoiled a long time ago, we did not realize that this trash and installed card is not a cost. So when the corp scores this, the runner is allowed to trash the opponent's cards, and the corporation's allowed to trash the runner's cards. And so now you got this sort of like, I'm going to smack you in the face, you smack me in the face, back and forth until someone gives up. And that's awesome. That's kind of cool. I'm really excited that's how this card works. In theory, you can trash your own cards if you really want to. There are some edge cases when that's okay. Maybe there's like something with MCA informant on it that you want to get rid of by not paying 2 credits. You can't get rid of the MCA informant, mind you. It's a token, not a card, I think. But it puts a runner in a scary situation where they say, okay, if you want to trash one of the corporation's cards, I'm going to trash one of your cards. And generally trashing one of the runner cards is kind of a bigger issue. It can be a bigger issue just because if you trash a program and they have no recursion, that's it. That's all you got. Say I'm playing Scorpios and I score one of these off. I'm basically saying trash one of my ice, and I'm going to trash one of your programs and remove it from the game. And a lot of times that'll lose the runner of the game if they don't have redundancy or backup breakers, anything like that. So I think standoff is really scary. On that basis, what happens if the runner just declines and says like, nah, I'm not going to trash anything? Honestly, not much happens, and that's kind of the worst part about this card. The corp gains 5 credits, which is basically like gain 3 credits because you spend 2 on this, and they draw a card. Those are both good things, like they're not bad things, but spending your whole turn to gain 3 credits on a card isn't fantastic. I think the best part of this at the end of the day is that you have an agenda, and having an agenda alone, even if it's worth 0 points, you can get some value out of that. I actually think drawing 1 card is kind of clumsy, because if you start your turn with 5 cards and you mandatory into 6 and then you score this, you're going to have to discard a card at the end of your turn, which is kind of a bummer. But you got an agenda, you got a 2-0 agenda if this goes through. I think a lot of times the runner won't fight the standoff. I'm actually really excited for the game states in which everyone just kind of tilts and destroys the entire board on each side. I guess if you have more cards, you will win if you have more installed cards. But yeah, what can you do in the agenda? You have cards like this. You have Archer. Archer requires a forfeit in an agenda, so it's cool to have an agenda that's not worth points, that's easy to score, that you can res your Archer. Admittedly though, Standoff and Archer feel to be kind of, they don't work well together. Because if I'm going to res an Archer, if I score my second Standoff, now the runner has an option to trash my Archer, which they might actually do, considering Archer's like really good if you trash it, because it's a very hard ice to deal with. So like there's an anti-synergy inherently between these two cards, and it kind of goes with every other card that requires something to forfeit to being res. Like Corporate Town's a good card, but if I'm going to give the runner an ability to trash my Corporate Town, they might just take it. So there's kind of an anti-synergy here inherently. You could protect these cards by playing something like Warroid Tracker, something like that, where you say like, oh, if you want to trash one of my cards, I'll come back and hurt you, which is kind of cool. So you do have some value there, but it's kind of weird how those work together. I think the best reason why you can use these agendas is Jemison Astronautics. Jemison likes to forfeit agendas to score things. Yeah, I don't think Standoff is fantastic because when you forfeit this, you only get one advancement counter, which is basically like if you're going to install something like an Oberth on your turn and then forfeit Standoff and then advance a card, you don't actually gain that much value. You do forfeit a 2/0 for a 3/2, but it's a blank 3/2, as opposed to if you forfeited something like a hostile takeover, you'd actually get two advancement counters, and that's obviously a lot better. So I'm not sure. I think if you're playing Standoff, I'd rather play Hostile Takeover first if it's a fast advanced Jemison deck, as much as the Bad Pup isn't great. So Standoff would probably be like your 4th and 5th and maybe 6th Hostile Takeover, pseudo Hostile Takeover. It's just not amazing just because you don't get that much value. However, it's definitely worth looking into. I also think it's kind of bad to run a lot of agendas, especially a lot of small agendas, because Aaron Moran is really popular, and you're going to give Aaron Moran value. On the opposite side of the spectrum, if you have a Standoff and it's stolen, you can now hit somebody with a Hunter Seeker. You can now hit someone with a mid-season replacement. So sometimes having a lot of agendas, specifically agendas that if the runner steals, it's not that bad. It's actually kind of good for those cards. Also, Argus Security is pretty good because it's another agenda that just says take a tag, do meat damage. That's kind of cool. And also, like, stock buyback is kind of sweet if you can give a bunch of these away, because you can now just cash in on all those standoffs that you have fed over to the runner. Do be careful if the runner starts playing, or runners start playing Turntable again, a card that used to be very popular. You're going to regret playing Standoff because they're going to take your agendas away for nothing, and that's not great. It's a really weird card. I'm like kind of excited to see board states at tournaments where somebody scores a Standoff and the runner says, okay, I'll trash one of my cards, and the corp says, okay, I'll trash one of your cards, and the runner's like, what? And then they explain the ruling and it's too late for the runner to trash the corpse cards. That's going to be kind of funny. I hope this card's intuitive enough that people understand how this works, but when you score this, the value you don't get, I think the value you get is not amazing, so it's best that you forfeit this for something, but it's kind of anti-synergistic that you're allowing people to trash your cards that you forfeited agendas for. This card's gonna get better once we see more cards that have to get forfeited to be rezzed. I know there's a big ice coming in the near future, but it's definitely a really cool card, and it might be something in Jemison. I'm not entirely sure. Talk about Jemison. This is Success. It's a triple. Just to talk about the name, this is Jemison's. The subtitle is Sacrifice, Audacity, Success. We've seen Sacrifice, the card. We've seen Audacity, the card, and this is Success, which is finishing off our Jemison tour here. Nothing to play. It is a triple though, and we've seen a couple triples in this cycle so far, so you have to spend your whole turn, or more accurately, you have to spend 2 additional clicks to play it. And it says advance a card X times. X equals the advancement requirement of this agenda just forfeited. And the difference between surviving and thriving is successful terraforming, which, as much as Jemison Astronautics might be about space travel, it also seems to be a bit about terraforming, considering you can see the sort of like Jemison domes on the planet, and that's cool. Terraforming is cool. Alright, so what does this card do? It lets you forfeit a card to score another agenda, and that's pretty good in Jemison because you get a lot of value out of it. It is a triple though, so if you want to forfeit an agenda, it either has to be on the table already, or you have to play something like Biotic Labor, and Biotic Labor install an agenda, and then play your Success. How many advancement tokens can you get? Wow, how many advancement tokens can you get with Success? You can get a lot, just because Success also fires onto Jemison. So if we do the math really quick, we have a 5/3 agenda like High Risk Takeover, which is a good agenda to forfeit if you already got your value. You've always used your... I thought I spelled that right. And you already got your value here. High Risk Investment. It's not Takeover. Oops. So if you have a High Risk Investment, you forfeit this, and you actually get... X equals the advancement requirement of the agenda just forfeited. So this would be 5, not 3. So not only do you get 5 tokens on a card, but you also get the Jemison numbers. So you would forfeit this, so you get 9. Yeah, so you get 5 plus 3 plus 1, and that's 9. And 9's a pretty big number because of government takeover. The idea is that if you have this on the table, so you can biotic this out, install it, and then play Success to forfeit your 5/3, you can score government takeover virtually from hand, and that's cool. I think that's kind of the high roll of this, and I don't know whether you run a deck that runs government takeover and 3-pointers. I guess maybe you do if you want to go for low agenda density, but there's like the number scale anywhere. If you want to forfeit a 3/2, you'll get 6 tokens, so you can forfeit a 3/2 to get a vanity project. That's not bad at all. And you can forfeit a 2/1 to get 4 agenda tokens on something, which is not amazing. It's also cool how this, it's cool how this is an advancement requirement, not the agenda points. So in theory, this card gets a bit better because it is a 5/2, as not appealing as that is. But it also makes 3 1s on par. So if you want to play something like False Lead, which is cool in Jemison decks because it's an agenda that can forfeit itself, is this actually gets 5 advancements as opposed to... Yeah, with Jemison's a bit worse, but the point is that you don't get punished that hard for running 1-pointers, which is kind of cool, and I hope 1-pointers see more play in the future. This card's also very similar to this one that we don't have art that came out in the last pack or 2 packs ago. I think it's last pack. That's Red Planet Couriers that says the additional cost, it's a triple, and move all advancement tokens from an installed card to one card that can be advanced. And I've seen a lot of people play like big decks where they just put a lot of advancement tokens and try and score out a government takeover from hand. And this card actually lets you combo out in a very similar way. You still need biotic labors. You still probably want to play this either in Jemison. You could play it in Titan Transnational too, just so you can tutor some cards with some of your Atlas tokens. But they both actually give like pretty legitimate win conditions in slightly weird situations. I think this is definitely better in Jemison, but you probably have to play biotic labor if you're not feeling too brave about like leaving a vanity project on the table unadvanced, hoping that the runner doesn't steal it on their turn. Now the weirdest thing and arguably the best thing about this card is actually the wording on it. It says you advance a card X times, and every other card in Netrunner, I'm pretty sure that is an operation that puts like that advances things. They don't say advance a card, they actually say place advancement tokens. You'll see that right here on Shipment from Tennin. It says place 2 advancement tokens. And there's like a really large semantic difference between those two words, because placing advancement tokens it's different. Advancing a card is actually an action, and there's a lot of agendas, especially in Wayland, that say whenever you advance this card, do something good. And that's kind of the coolest thing about success. It's also kind of weird, like I don't know if they did this on purpose to make this card better or whether this is just a goof in the typing, because every other single card in the game does not say it like this card. It's just kind of inconsistent and weird. It does make this card a lot better though, so for what that's worth. The idea is that if you forfeit an agenda, say we have forfeit a 5/3 to like, okay, let's just say forfeit a hostile takeover, a 2/1. So we get 2 tokens onto this thing, and then we forfeit, so we get 2 more tokens. So not only do we fast advance an Oaktown renovation, sort of, we also get 4 credits. You could sacrifice a 5/3, which puts 5 tokens on this, plus another 4, so you get 9 advancement tokens. So not only do you score an Oaktown renovation, but you've also gained, oh shit, what's the money here? You gain like a lot. You gain a lot. I think you gain like 10, 14 credits, something like that. That's not amazing because you fast advance an Oaktown renovation, but this actually gets a lot better with Hollywood renovation. This is a 5/3 that says whenever you advance it, you may place advancement tokens on another card. And when you double advance this, or over advance it, sorry, you get to place 2 tokens on a different card. So it's not, you have to go like pretty deep into the combo jank tank, but there are some ways in which you have a Hollywood renovation on the table, you have some other click somehow, you install a different agenda, and then you success away an agenda to advance Hollywood renovation, and you use the Hollywood renovation to advance not only itself but another agenda. Like I think there are ways to score like 7 points perhaps in a turn, maybe 6 points in a turn, as long as you have like a number of biotic labors, something like that, just to get cards on the table. Maybe you do like Shipment for Mirror Morph, biotic labor, I don't know, something like that. Maybe you actually play Warroid Work Crew. Maybe you play Warroid Work Crew and Shipment from Mirror Morph, something like that. Oh, 4 influence, forget it. But the point being is that you can now get so much value by fast advancing a Hollywood renovation, and even if you're not scoring another agenda, you could like start advancing your ice heavily. Like you could have a firewall with like 14 tokens on it just because you scored a 5/3, and that's kind of nutty. That might be good. Like a huge Colossus, that might be good. You also have a card like Oberth, and Oberth fires on top of success. Just because it says whenever you advance a card, advance it again with additional token, and this actually advances cards. So these two combo really well together. It's definitely a strong card. It needs some support because I'm not convinced like having unadvanced like big agendas and hoping the runner doesn't run on them is that good. It gets a lot better if you can protect that stuff. If you're running a sort of glaciery build, maybe you want to run off the grid, and then you can actually afford to like get a 5/3 in the server and protect it for 1 turn, and then you can forfeit out to score it. I don't know. There's definitely a lot of combo shenanigans in here. It's a triple, so it makes it hard to like fire things off like Ronin or other traps, but it's definitely interesting. I think you're gonna see a lot of decks that play Success or a lot of decks that play Red Planet Couriers because they're both kind of interesting. I think Red Planet Couriers is a lot easier to use, and Success kind of requires you to play Jemison, which isn't great for the design of a card that it's only really good in one faction, one specific ID. We haven't seen that often, but it's definitely an interesting card, and Maybe we'll see more support for Jemison. I don't know. We still have 2 more packs in the cycle. Last card. Oh man, how long is this going on for? Oh, we got this. This is mass commercialization. It's a transaction operation. It says gain 2 credits for each card with at least 1 advancement token on it. It costs nothing to play. It is full neutral. This card's neat. This is commercialization that gave you credits equal to how many advancement tokens on a single piece of ice, and this is much more easy to play. Putting advancement tokens on multiple pieces of ice isn't that hard to do or that expensive to do. Advancing a single piece of ice a lot is not only kind of risky because ice destruction, but it doesn't like it's just not fantastic because it doesn't spread out your defenses. While mass commercialization not only gives you a bigger payback, but it kind of benefits you just not putting all your eggs in one basket. We've talked about Tendon Institute before. It lets you put advancements on a lot of things, a lot of different things, as long as the runner doesn't run. So these two work really well together. Like if you're putting tokens on all your ice because the runner doesn't run, even if the ice isn't advanceable, you can get a lot of value out of this card. And it's not hard to get value out of this card. If you have 2 cards that have like 1 advancement a piece on them, this is hedge fund that you can play from 0. As soon as you have 3 advancements on a card, this is better than Restructure that you can play at 0. It's better than IPO that you can play at 0. And advancing cards isn't terrible in a lot of factions. Also, gotta remind you, this works with things like agendas. Like you can install advanced in agenda, and if you have like 2 pieces of ice advance, play this, gain 6. That's really good. So who plays this? Besides Tennin, Builder of Nations is a huge candidate because this ID out of any ID in the game wants to advance all their ice once. So there could be a late point in the game where you play this and get like 12 credits. I don't think that's entirely unreasonable. You could also play Because We Built It, but I recommend you not to try it. Actually, no, I recommend you to try it, but you'll figure out really quickly why this ability is just not that great. It's just not a lot of value. Wayland, Building a Better World does get value out of this. Sure, you're probably not that good at advancing ice, but this is a transaction, so you get 1 credit off the bat, which isn't bad. And advancing ice is not bad in Wayland. Sure, you have cards like this that are good to advance infinitely, and that's kind of cool because this now becomes a 2 strength barrier, which is okay, but if you get this higher, it's even better. You have ice like this that just came out that kind of wants you to advance it because it gets stronger and stronger every time you advance it, so you're going to get some value out of it. I think absolutely fascinating is we have Satellite Grid, a card that that didn't see any really play before, but now if you have a server with 3 pieces of ice, you can put a Satellite Grid, res it, and now gain like at least 6 credits with your mass commercialization because every single piece of ice is considered to have an advancement token. And that's kind of nuts that these two work together so well. Perhaps you want to play Shipment from Kaguya, get some advancements on multiple pieces of cards. Maybe if you're playing this, you want to play Trick of Light. There is a bit of an anti-synergy because if you draw this after you Trick of Light, you're going to lose that on some money. Anson Rose is good, get some advancements on ice, and you also have the Pad Factory, which can get some advancements on any card that you want. It doesn't matter if it's advanceable or not, just put them there. This card's good, it's flexible, it's only good in like a certain subsection of IDs, but it's like really good economy for them. I didn't talk that much, but we do have the advanceable space ice, which is kind of cool. We haven't seen those in a while. Perhaps also this is a nice enough reason to start running things like the morph ice, because you generally get to morph them into the things that are harder to break. Like if you have a change link, making a 4 strength end the run sentry is a lot better than having it as a barrier. So now you get extra value from morphing this thing. You can run this in a trap deck. Like if you're installing double advancing, if you're Mushin no shinning out a lot of cards, you can get value from this. I think overall, this is quite cool. It's a quite cool operation card. It encourages interesting play, encourages thoughtful, future conscious play, and I like that a lot of times than just playing Restructure. It's cool. I don't know if it's a 3 of index unless you're for sure advancing things, but it's definitely a very interesting card. I love that art. It kind of looks like Rapture in some ways. Like it looks kind of underwater. Oh boy, that's all the cards. That's all of them. This is Blood and Water, a lot of really strong cards. Perhaps I'm over-analyzing the Whampoa, but I'm kind of scared about this. I think this card's absolutely nuts. Loki's cool. This is a really great card. Strong card. The Nbn stuff isn't good. I think that's largely it. Mass Commercialization's good. Let me know what you think. I'm going to be building some decks over the next while, playing some techie.net games on stream and on the YouTube channel, so let me know what you think. Otherwise, yeah, if I missed anything, let me know too. Man, yeah, I've been talking for a while. It's getting warm in here. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned. We'll have more content on this channel. It comes out regularly on the weekday nights. Otherwise, Thursday, 8:45 Eastern, we're live streaming. Hopefully, drop by. Ciao.